The morning mist clung to the grounds of Ashworth Academy like a ghostly shroud, concealing secrets that had been brewing for months. Detective Sarah Chen stood at the wrought iron gates, her breath forming small clouds in the cold December air. The prestigious boarding school, with its Gothic towers and manicured lawns, looked peaceful enough from the outside. But Sarah knew better than to trust appearances. Inside the academy's main hall, Headmaster Dr. Edmund Blackwood paced nervously behind his mahogany desk. His usually pristine silver hair was disheveled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. The phone call he had received 3 hours earlier still echoed in his mind like a death knell. "We have your precious Charlotte," the distorted voice had whispered through the speaker. "One wrong move, and she disappears forever." Charlotte Ashworth, the 15-year-old daughter of tech billionaire Victoria Ashworth, had vanished from her dormitory sometime during the night. Her roommate, Emma Rodriguez, had discovered the empty bed at dawn, the covers thrown back as if Charlotte had left in haste. What troubled Sarah most was the complete absence of any signs of struggle. The window remained locked from the inside, and Charlotte's belongings were untouched except for her phone, which lay shattered on the floor. Victoria Ashworth arrived at the school in a convoy of black SUVs, her face a mask of controlled fury and barely contained panic. The tech mogul had built her empire by staying 3 steps ahead of everyone else, but now she found herself helpless, watching her daughter's life hang in the balance of an unknown enemy's whims. "I want every resource available," Victoria commanded Sarah, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Money is no object. Find my daughter." Sarah nodded grimly. She had worked kidnapping cases before, but something about this one felt different. The precision of the operation, the complete lack of physical evidence, and the choice of victim all pointed to something far more sophisticated than a typical ransom scheme. Marcus Sullivan, the academy's head of security, joined them in the headmaster's office. A former military operative with steel-gray eyes and scarred hands, Marcus had always prided himself on the school's impeccable safety record. The disappearance felt like a personal failure, and his jaw clenched with barely suppressed anger. "Sir," Marcus addressed Dr. Blackwood, "I've reviewed all the security footage from last night." The cameras covering Charlotte's dormitory wing went dark for exactly 17 minutes, from 2:23 to 2:40 a.m. When they came back online, everything appeared normal. Sarah's eyes sharpened. "That's very specific timing. Someone with technical expertise planned this down to the minute." The investigation revealed disturbing details as the morning progressed. Charlotte had been receiving anonymous messages for weeks, according to her close friend Isabella Thompson. The messages started innocuously enough, compliments about her artwork, comments about her daily routines, but gradually became more personal and invasive. "She showed me some of them," Isabella whispered to Sarah, tears streaming down her cheeks. "At first, we thought it was just another student with a crush. But then, the person started mentioning things only someone watching her closely would know. What she ate for breakfast, which path she took to classes, even what she wore to bed." The revelation sent chills down Sarah's spine. This wasn't a random kidnapping for money. Someone had been stalking Charlotte for weeks, learning her patterns, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Dr. Blackwood's secretary, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, provided another crucial piece of information. 3 days earlier, a man claiming to be Charlotte's uncle had called the school, asking detailed questions about the girl's schedule and living arrangements. Mrs. Hayes had found the call suspicious and had refused to provide any information, but now she wondered if she should have reported it immediately. "He had a slight accent," Mrs. Hayes recalled, wringing her hands nervously. "British, I think, but trying to hide it. He knew Charlotte's full name, her mother's maiden name, even the name of her childhood pet. I thought he might be legitimate family." Victoria's face paled at this revelation. "Charlotte doesn't have an uncle," she said quietly. "My husband died when she was 3, and he was an only child. I have one sister who lives in Australia and wouldn't know those details about Charlotte's daily life." The kidnapper's knowledge of intimate family details suggested either extensive surveillance or inside information. Sarah began to suspect that someone within Victoria's inner circle might be involved, either willingly or through coercion. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the academy grounds, Sarah gathered the core team in the school's library. The ancient room, with its towering shelves and leather-bound volumes, seemed to hold secrets of its own. Maps of the surrounding area covered a large oak table, marked with potential escape routes and hiding places.
The kidnapper chose this location carefully, Sarah explained to the assembled group.
Ashworth Academy is isolated, surrounded by dense woods and private estates. There are dozens of places within a 20-mile radius where someone could hide a hostage. Marcus pointed to several locations on the map. These abandoned estates were all purchased in the last 6 months by shell companies. I had my contacts run background checks, but the ownership trails lead nowhere.
It's like whoever bought them wanted to remain completely anonymous.
Victoria studied the map with the calculating gaze that had made her one of the world's most successful entrepreneurs. The Thornfield estate, she said suddenly, pointing to a large property northeast of the school. I tried to buy that land 2 years ago for a new research facility. The owner refused to sell, no matter how much I offered. Then, suddenly, it appeared on the market 6 months ago. The pieces of a larger puzzle were beginning to emerge, but Sarah knew they were running out of time. Kidnapping cases had a critical window, usually 72 hours, after which the chances of finding the victim alive dropped dramatically.
As darkness fell over Ashworth Academy, Sarah received another phone call from the kidnapper.
This time, the voice was clearer, more confident, as if the speaker no longer feared being identified. "Detective Chen," the voice said, causing Sarah's blood to run cold.
How did they know her name?
"You're getting close, but not close enough. Charlotte is safe for now, but my patience has limits. I want to speak with Victoria Ashworth at exactly midnight. She should come alone to the old chapel in Thornfield Cemetery.
Any deviation from these instructions, and Charlotte pays the price."
The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone with a mixture of dread and determination.
The kidnapper was escalating, becoming bolder.
It was either a sign of desperation or supreme confidence.
Either way, it meant the endgame was approaching.
Victoria insisted on going to the cemetery alone, despite Sarah's strong objections. "This is my daughter," she said firmly. "I won't risk her life by bringing an army of police officers to what's clearly meant to be a private meeting."
Marcus checked his service weapon and adjusted his radio. "I'll position myself in the woods around the cemetery. Close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to remain undetected." Sarah nodded grimly.
"And I'll coordinate from here with the tactical team.
If this goes wrong, we need to be ready to move fast."
As midnight approached, Victoria made her way through the twisting country roads toward Thornfield Cemetery. The ancient graveyard sat on a hill overlooking the valley, its weathered headstones casting long shadows in the moonlight. The old chapel, built in the 1800s, stood at the cemetery's heart like a silent sentinel. Victoria parked her car at the cemetery gates and walked the winding path to the chapel. Her footsteps echoed off the stone monuments, and every shadow seemed to harbor potential threats. She had faced hostile corporate takeovers and cutthroat business negotiations, but nothing had prepared her for this moment of absolute vulnerability. The chapel door stood slightly ajar, creaking softly in the wind. Victoria pushed it open and stepped inside, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it could be heard throughout the small building. "Welcome, Victoria," a familiar voice said from the shadows near the altar.
"I've been waiting for this moment for a very long time."
A figure stepped into the moonlight streaming through the stained glass windows, and Victoria gasped in recognition. Standing before her was someone she had trusted completely, someone who had been part of her inner circle for years. "James," she whispered, her voice breaking.
"But why?"
James Whitmore, her longtime business partner and Charlotte's godfather, smiled coldly.
"Why?"
"Because you destroyed my life, Victoria. You stole my innovations, my patents, my future. And then, you discarded me like yesterday's newspaper when I was no longer useful to you."
The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow.
James had been Charlotte's favorite adult besides herself, the man who had taught her daughter to ride a bike and attended every school play.
The betrayal cut deeper than any business loss ever could. "Where is she, James? Where's my daughter?"
James's expression softened slightly, revealing a glimpse of the man Victoria had once considered her closest friend.
She's safe, for now.
But her future depends entirely on your willingness to make amends for what you've done to me.
The confrontation in the chapel was only the beginning of a deadly game that would test the bonds of family, friendship, and trust.
As Victoria faced the man she had once trusted with her life, she realized that the greatest threats sometimes came from those closest to home. The cold stone walls of the chapel seemed to close in around Victoria as she stared at James Whitmore, the man who had been like family to her for over a decade. His once warm brown eyes now held a calculating coldness that made her stomach turn. "You're wondering how I could do this to Charlotte," James said, reading the anguish on her face. "The little girl who calls me Uncle Jamie and bakes me birthday cakes every year." Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. "She loves you, James. How could you use that against her?"
Love? James laughed bitterly. The same way you loved me when you needed my artificial intelligence algorithms to build your empire? The same way you loved me when you testified that my neural network designs were actually collaborative efforts, giving your company equal claim to the patents worth billions?
The memories flooded back, and Victoria felt the weight of her past decisions. 5 years ago, during a bitter legal battle over intellectual property rights, she had indeed claimed joint ownership of James's innovations. At the time, she had convinced herself it was necessary to save the company and protect hundreds of jobs. Now, seeing the hatred in James's eyes, she realized the true cost of that choice. "I protected the company," she said weakly.
"I protected all of us."
"You protected yourself," James shot back.
"While I lost everything. My reputation in the tech industry was destroyed."
"No one would hire the man who supposedly stole ideas from his business partner. I had to sell my house, my car, everything I owned just to pay legal fees."
Meanwhile, back at Ashworth Academy, Detective Sarah Chen was coordinating with the FBI's kidnapping response team. Agent Rebecca Torres, a specialist in corporate crimes, had arrived from the regional office with a team of analysts who were digging deep into James Whitmore's background.
"He disappeared from public records about 18 months ago," Agent Torres reported. "No credit card usage, no bank transactions, no digital footprint whatsoever.
It's like he became a ghost."
Marcus Sullivan provided crucial intelligence from his military contacts. "I had some friends in private security run background checks on all academy staff and frequent visitors.
James Whitmore has been using at least 3 different identities over the past year.
He's been planning this for a long time."
Sarah studied the surveillance photos spread across the table.
James had been photographed near the school on at least 6 occasions over the past 3 months, always in disguise, sometimes as a delivery driver, once as a maintenance worker, and twice as a parent visiting for school events. He's been mapping Charlotte's routines for months, Sarah realized. Every photo shows him in a position to observe her movements without being noticed.
At the school's computer lab, IT specialist David Kim made a disturbing discovery. "Someone's been hacking into the academy's network for weeks," he reported.
"They access student schedules, dormitory assignments, even the security camera rotation schedules. It's sophisticated work. Whoever did this knows their way around advanced cybersecurity."
The pieces of James's elaborate plan were becoming clear.
He had used his technical expertise to infiltrate every aspect of Charlotte's life at the academy, learning her patterns and vulnerabilities while remaining completely invisible to the security systems.
Back in the chapel, James continued his psychological assault on Victoria.
"Do you want to know what the worst part was?" he asked, his voice dripping with venom. "Watching you become Time magazine's Innovator of the Year using my work. Seeing you give speeches about the importance of ethical innovation while you built your fortune on stolen intellectual property." Victoria felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but she forced herself to stay focused on what mattered most.
"Whatever I did to you, Charlotte is innocent.
She doesn't deserve to suffer for my mistakes."
"Innocent?"
James's laugh was harsh and bitter. "She's the princess of a stolen kingdom, Victoria. Every privilege she enjoys, every opportunity she's given, it all comes from what you took from me." The sound of footsteps outside the chapel made both of them freeze.
James immediately pulled out a remote control device with a single red button.
That would be your security team, he said calmly.
I warned you to come alone.
One press of this button, and Charlotte's location becomes very, very difficult to find. Victoria raised her hands in a gesture of surrender.
Please, James. I came alone as you asked. Whatever you heard must be local police or cemetery security.
Through his earpiece, Marcus heard the conversation and immediately signaled his team to pull back.
The risk to Charlotte was too great to take any chances.
James seemed satisfied with Victoria's explanation but kept the device visible as a constant threat.
I want you to understand something, Victoria. This isn't just about revenge. This is about justice. You destroyed my life and built yours on the ruins. Now it's time to balance the scales. What do you want? Victoria asked, though she dreaded the answer.
I want you to confess publicly that you stole my work. I want you to transfer 50% of Ashworth Technology's shares to an account I'll specify. And I want you to personally apologize to Charlotte for building her privileged life on a foundation of lies. The demands were devastating. Public confession would destroy Victoria's reputation and likely result in criminal charges. Transferring half the company would destabilize the business and eliminate thousands of jobs. But the thought of Charlotte suffering because of her past mistakes was unbearable.
If I agree to your terms, Victoria said carefully, how do I know you'll release Charlotte unharmed?
James smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression.
Because despite what you think of me, I'm not a monster.
Charlotte has always been kind to me, even when you started pushing me out of the company.
I don't want to hurt her. I just want you to feel the same helplessness and loss that I've lived with for years.
The conversation was interrupted by Victoria's phone buzzing with a text message.
James nodded permission for her to check it, keeping the remote-controlled device pointed at her threateningly.
The message was from Detective Chen. We've located 3 possible sites where Charlotte might be held.
Moving to investigate. Do not let him know we're closing in.
Victoria's poker face, honed by years of high-stakes business negotiations, served her well. She showed no reaction to the message and casually put her phone away.
I need time to consider your demands, she told James. Transferring that much stock requires board approval and regulatory filings. It can't be done overnight.
James's eyes narrowed suspiciously.
You're stalling.
I'm being practical, Victoria replied. Even if I wanted to agree immediately, the legal requirements make it impossible.
Give me 24 hours to put everything in motion. 12 hours, James countered.
And, to show good faith, I want you to make a public statement within the next 3 hours admitting that your success was built on stolen intellectual property. Meanwhile, at the FBI's mobile command center set up near Ashworth Academy, Agent Torres was coordinating simultaneous raids on the 3 properties Marcus had identified as potential hiding places.
Team Alpha, you take the Thornfield estate. Team Beta, the old Morrison farm.
Team Charlie, the abandoned Blackwater mill, she instructed through her radio.
Remember, the subject is a 15-year-old girl who may be guarded. Use extreme caution.
Team Alpha approached the Thornfield estate through dense woods that surrounded the property. The Georgian mansion had been empty for decades, its windows boarded up and grounds overgrown with wild vegetation. Agent Mike Crawford led his team around the perimeter, noting fresh tire tracks in the mud near the rear entrance.
Looks like someone's been here recently, he whispered into his radio. Infrared shows possible heat signatures on the 2nd floor.
At the Morrison farm, Team Beta found a more promising lead. The farmhouse appeared abandoned, but the barn showed signs of recent activity. Fresh straw had been laid in several stalls, and a generator hummed quietly in the corner.
We've got electrical activity and what looks like a makeshift living space, reported Agent Lisa Park. Moving in for closer inspection. Team Charlie's search of the Blackwater mill initially seemed fruitless.
The old grain mill sat beside a rushing stream, its water wheel long since seized by rust and neglect. But Agent Danny Rodriguez noticed something odd about the mill's basement windows. They had been covered with black paint from the inside, blocking any view of the interior.
Back in the chapel, James was becoming increasingly agitated.
The carefully controlled demeanor he had maintained was beginning to crack under the pressure of executing his elaborate revenge scheme. "You know what the worst part about losing everything was?" he said, pacing back and forth in front of the altar.
"It wasn't the money or even the professional humiliation.
It was watching Charlotte grow up with opportunities that should have funded my own daughter's future." Victoria's heart stopped.
Your daughter? James, you never mentioned having a daughter."
"Sarah," James said quietly, and, for the first time, his voice held genuine pain rather than anger. "She would have been Charlotte's age now. When I lost everything because of your betrayal, I couldn't afford her medical treatments anymore.
Leukemia.
She died 2 years ago in a county hospital because I couldn't pay for the experimental therapy that might have saved her."
The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow.
She remembered James taking extended leaves from the company for family emergencies but had never pried into the details. Now she understood the true cost of their legal battle had been measured in more than money.
"James, I'm so sorry."
"I never knew." "Of course you didn't know," he erupted. "You were too busy destroying my life to care about the collateral damage." The sound of helicopters in the distance made both of them look up. James's face went pale as he realized what it meant. "You brought them here," he whispered, his finger hovering over the red button. "You betrayed me again, just like before." "I came alone, exactly as you asked," Victoria protested.
"Whatever's happening, I had nothing to do with it."
Through his earpiece, Marcus received an urgent update from Agent Torres. "We found her. Charlotte's safe. She's at the old mill, secured in a basement room but unharmed. Subject appears to have fled the scene recently."
James must have seen something in Victoria's expression because his face twisted with rage.
"They found her, didn't they?"
"Your police friends found my insurance policy."
"If Charlotte is safe, then this can end peacefully," Victoria said carefully.
"You can walk away from this, James. You can start over somewhere else."
"Start over?"
James laughed wildly. "With what? I've spent everything I had left on this plan.
Every cent, every contact, every favor owed to me.
This was my last chance for justice."
The chapel door suddenly burst open, and Marcus Sullivan entered with his weapon drawn.
"James Whitmore, you're under arrest for kidnapping and extortion.
Put down the device and step away from Mrs. Ashworth." James looked at the remote control in his hand, then at Victoria, then at the armed security officer. For a moment, his finger tightened on the button, and everyone held their breath.
"You know what the real tragedy is?" James said quietly. "We used to be friends.
We used to trust each other. We built something beautiful together before it all went wrong." He gently placed the remote control on the chapel's altar and raised his hands in surrender. "I'm done," he said simply.
"I'm just done."
As Marcus handcuffed James and led him toward the door, the broken man turned back to Victoria one last time. "I hope Charlotte grows up to be better than both of us," he said. "She deserves a world where friends don't destroy each other for money." Victoria collapsed onto one of the chapel's wooden pews, emotionally and physically drained. The nightmare was over, but the scars it had revealed in her past would take much longer to heal. Charlotte was safe, but the cost of that safety had been the complete destruction of a friendship that had once meant everything to her. 6 months after Charlotte's rescue, the courtroom was packed with reporters, former colleagues, and curious onlookers as James Whitmore's trial reached its climax. Victoria sat in the front row, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on her back. She had been dreading this moment, not because she feared James's testimony, but because she knew the truth about their relationship would finally be exposed to the world. District Attorney Margaret Collins had built a solid case against James, focusing on the premeditation and psychological manipulation involved in Charlotte's kidnapping. The evidence was overwhelming: surveillance footage, digital records of his planning, and his own detailed confession. But James's defense attorney, public defender Robert Martinez, had a different strategy in mind. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Martinez began his opening statement, "this case is about more than kidnapping. It's about a friendship betrayed, a dying child abandoned by those with the power to help, and a man driven to desperation by a system that values profit over human life. The defense strategy was clear: they weren't going to deny James's guilt, but they were going to use his trial as a platform to expose Victoria's business practices and moral failings. Charlotte had insisted on attending the trial despite her mother's concerns. Now 16 and more mature than her years, she wanted to understand the full context of what had happened to her family. "I need to hear his side of the story," she had told Victoria. "Not just the version where he's the villain and we're the victims." Detective Sarah Chen testified about the investigation, describing the meticulous planning that had gone into Charlotte's abduction. But, under cross-examination, Martinez focused on a different aspect of the case. "Detective Chen, in your investigation, did you discover that Mr. Whitmore had previously asked Mrs. Ashworth for financial help to pay for his daughter's medical treatment?" "Yes, that came up during our interviews." "And, did you find evidence that Mrs. Ashworth was financially capable of providing that help at the time?" Detective Chen glanced uncomfortably at Victoria. "Yes, the financial records suggest she had significant liquid assets available." The testimony continued for 3 days, painting a picture of James as a desperate father who had exhausted every legal avenue to save his daughter before resorting to desperate measures. Agent Rebecca Torres took the stand to describe James's emotional state during his confession. The defendant was clearly suffering from severe depression and what appeared to be complicated grief over his daughter's death. He repeatedly expressed regret about involving Charlotte and seemed primarily motivated by a desire to make Mrs. Ashworth experience similar feelings of helplessness. On the 4th day, Victoria herself was called to testify. She had been preparing for this moment with her legal team for weeks, knowing that her words could influence both the trial's outcome and her family's future. "Mrs. Ashworth," District Attorney Collins began, "please describe your relationship with the defendant prior to your business dispute." Victoria took a deep breath. "James Whitmore was my business partner, my closest friend, and Charlotte's godfather. We built Ashworth Technologies together from nothing, and I trusted him completely." "What changed that relationship?" "We disagreed about the ownership of certain technological innovations. James claimed sole credit for neural network algorithms that I believed were developed collaboratively. The dispute became a legal battle that lasted over 2 years. Under cross-examination, Martinez was less gentle. "Mrs. Ashworth, you testified that the algorithms were developed collaboratively. Do you have any documentation showing your personal contribution to their development?" Victoria felt her throat tighten. "The work was done in informal settings. We didn't always document who contributed what ideas. But, you do have documentation showing that Mr. Whitmore worked on these algorithms independently for over 3 years before joining your company, correct?" "Yes, but, and, when Mr. Whitmore came to you requesting financial help for his daughter's medical treatment, what was your company's cash position at that time?" Victoria's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The question hung in the air like an accusation. "We had cash reserves, but they were allocated for business operations and growth investments." "How much did you spend on personal real estate purchases during the period when Mr. Whitmore's daughter was receiving treatment?" Victoria felt the courtroom's attention focus on her like a laser. "Approximately $37 million. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Charlotte, sitting behind the prosecutor's table, closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Martinez pressed on. "So to be clear, Mrs. Ashworth, while your former business partner was selling his possessions to pay for his dying daughter's medical care, you were purchasing luxury properties worth tens of millions of dollars?" The real estate purchases were made with personal funds, not company money. Personal funds that came from company profits generated in part by Mr. Whitmore's innovations? The questioning continued for hours, methodically exposing the timeline of events that had led to Sarah Whitmore's death and James's breakdown. Victoria found herself reliving every decision, every moment when she could have chosen differently. During a recess, Charlotte approached her mother in the courthouse hallway. "Mom, is it all true? About Uncle Jamie's daughter and the money?" Victoria looked into her daughter's eyes and saw disappointment mixed with love and confusion. "Yes, sweetheart. It's true. I made terrible decisions, and a little girl died because I was too focused on protecting business interests to help a friend in need. Why didn't you ever tell me about Sarah?"
because I was ashamed. Because admitting what I did would mean facing the fact that I'm not the person I've tried to be for you.
Charlotte hugged her mother tightly.
I still love you, Mom.
But I understand now why Uncle Jamie did what he did.
It doesn't make it right, but I understand it.
When court resumed, James himself took the stand in his own defense. He appeared frail and tired, like a man who had been carrying an unbearable weight for too long. Mr. Whitmore, Martinez began, please tell the court about your daughter Sarah. James's voice was barely audible.
Sarah was the smartest, kindest person I've ever known.
She wanted to be a doctor so she could help other sick children. When she got leukemia, she was more worried about how I was handling it than about her own pain.
What happened when the standard treatments weren't working?
The doctors said there was an experimental treatment available, but it cost $200,000 and wasn't covered by insurance. I had maybe $50,000 in savings, and I needed the rest quickly.
Did you ask anyone for help? James looked directly at Victoria. I asked my best friend and business partner. The person I trusted most in the world.
I begged her to help me save my daughter's life.
What was her response?
She said the company was going through a cash flow problem and couldn't spare the money. She suggested I take out a loan against my share of the business, but the banks wouldn't approve a loan large enough to cover the treatment costs.
How did you feel when you learned that Mrs. Ashworth had purchased expensive real estate during this same period?
James was quiet for a long moment.
Betrayed. Completely betrayed.
It felt like she had decided my daughter's life wasn't worth the inconvenience of liquidating some investments.
Is that when you decided to take legal action regarding the patents? I was desperate.
The patent dispute was my last hope for getting enough money to pay for Sarah's treatment. But the legal process took too long, and the medical bills kept growing.
Tell the court about your daughter's final days.
James began to cry, and several jurors wiped their eyes as he described Sarah's decline and death.
She asked me why we couldn't afford the medicine that might save her.
I had to tell my 13-year-old daughter that sometimes money matters more than life to the people who have it.
After Sarah's death, how did you cope? I didn't.
I spent months just trying to survive each day. But then, I saw Victoria on magazine covers being celebrated as an innovative leader, and I realized she was thriving while my world had ended.
When did you decide to take Charlotte?
About a year after Sarah died. I wasn't thinking clearly, grief and depression had warped my judgment. I convinced myself that Victoria needed to experience the same helplessness I felt when my child was in danger and I couldn't protect her.
Did you ever intend to physically harm Charlotte?
James shook his head emphatically.
Never.
Charlotte is a wonderful girl who didn't deserve to suffer for her mother's choices. I just wanted Victoria to feel what I felt, that terrible, crushing fear of losing someone you love more than your own life.
The courtroom was silent as James finished his testimony.
Even the reporters had stopped taking notes, absorbed in the raw emotion of his words. During closing arguments, both sides painted very different pictures of justice and responsibility. District Attorney Collins focused on the law. Regardless of Mr. Whitmore's personal tragedies, he committed serious crimes. He kidnapped an innocent child and terrorized a family.
Personal pain doesn't justify criminal behavior.
Defense Attorney Martinez emphasized the human element. James Whitmore's actions were wrong, but they came from a place of profound grief and betrayal. This is a man who watched his daughter die while his best friend chose money over mercy. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning with their verdict. They found James guilty of kidnapping but recommended leniency due to the extenuating circumstances and his cooperation with authorities. Judge Patricia Williams sentenced James to 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5 years. She also ordered him to undergo psychological counseling and prohibited him from contacting the Ashworth family without court approval. Mr. Whitmore, Judge Williams said before pronouncing sentence, your grief is understandable and your sense of betrayal is valid.
But your response to those feelings was criminally wrong. A child's innocence should never be sacrificed for an adult's revenge.
After the trial, Victoria and Charlotte walked out of the courthouse together, both emotionally drained by the experience.
What happens now?
Charlotte asked. Now we try to heal, Victoria replied.
And we try to do better.
True to her word, Victoria had established the Sarah Whitmore Foundation during the trial proceedings.
The foundation would provide financial assistance to families facing expensive experimental medical treatments for their children.
It was funded with $50 million from Victoria's personal assets, more than enough to have saved Sarah's life if it had existed years earlier. Charlotte had volunteered to serve on the foundation's board when she turned 18, wanting to ensure that other children wouldn't suffer as Sarah had. I can't change what I did, Victoria told reporters outside the courthouse. But I can try to prevent other families from facing impossible choices between financial security and a child's life. The trial had exposed uncomfortable truths about corporate ethics, friendship, and the price of ambition. But it had also shown that even in the darkest circumstances, there was still room for growth, forgiveness, and redemption.
As they drove away from the courthouse, Charlotte asked her mother one final question: "Do you think Uncle Jamie will ever forgive you?"
Victoria considered the question carefully.
"I don't know if he'll ever forgive me, sweetheart.
But, more importantly, I'm learning to forgive myself while still taking responsibility for the harm I caused.
That's the only way we can move forward."
The trial was over, but the real work of healing and making amends was just beginning. 3 years had passed since the trial that changed everything.
Charlotte, now 19 and a sophomore at MIT studying biomedical engineering, stood before the board of directors of the Sarah Whitmore Foundation as they reviewed applications for the year's grants. The foundation had grown beyond Victoria's original vision, now providing assistance to over 300 families annually. "This application is particularly compelling," Charlotte told the board, holding up a file. 8-year-old Marcus Chen needs a specialized gene therapy treatment for a rare genetic disorder. The family has exhausted their savings and been denied coverage by their insurance company.
Board member Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a pediatric oncologist who had joined the foundation in its second year, reviewed the medical documentation. "The treatment has shown promising results in clinical trials.
I recommend full funding."
Victoria, who now served as the foundation's executive director, nodded her approval.
"Approved. Let's get this family connected with our financial coordinators immediately."
The foundation had become Victoria's full-time focus after she stepped down as CEO of Ashworth Technologies. The decision to leave the company she had built had been difficult but necessary for her healing process. Under new leadership, the company had actually thrived, with several former employees noting that Victoria's departure had created a more collaborative and ethical workplace culture. Charlotte had insisted on visiting James Whitmore every few months during his imprisonment. The visits had been awkward at first, with James struggling to separate his anger toward Victoria from his genuine affection for Charlotte. But, gradually, they had developed a relationship based on mutual understanding and shared grief for all that had been lost.
"How is he doing?"
Victoria asked as Charlotte returned from her most recent visit to the minimum security facility where James was serving his sentence. "Better," Charlotte replied. "He's been working in the prison library and helping other inmates prepare for their GED exams. He said he wants to do something meaningful with whatever time he has left." James had been a model prisoner, and his psychological evaluations showed significant progress in dealing with his grief and depression. His parole hearing was scheduled for the following month, 2 years earlier than originally projected due to his exemplary behavior and participation in mental health programs. "He asked about you," Charlotte told her mother carefully.
"He wanted to know if you were happy."
Victoria considered the question. Happiness was complicated after everything that had happened. She felt fulfilled by the foundation's work and proud of Charlotte's growth into a compassionate young woman. But the weight of her past decisions would always be part of her story. "I'm at peace," Victoria finally answered. "That's more than I expected to achieve." The foundation had saved dozens of lives in its 3 years of operation, but Victoria knew it couldn't undo the past. Sarah Whitmore would still be dead, and James would still carry the scars of losing his daughter. The foundation was about preventing future tragedies, not erasing old ones. Detective Sarah Chan, who had stayed in touch with the family since the kidnapping investigation, visited the foundation's offices regularly to speak to staff about recognizing signs of domestic violence and stalking in the families they served. Her experience with the Whitmore case had taught her that desperation could drive ordinary people to extraordinary actions. The families you help are often at their most vulnerable, Detective Chen reminded the staff during her quarterly training session. Financial stress, medical crises, and fear for a child's life can push people to their breaking points. Always be alert for warning signs that someone might be considering desperate measures. Charlotte had taken these lessons to heart in her studies at MIT. Her research focused on developing less expensive alternatives to costly experimental treatments, with the goal of making life-saving medicine accessible to families regardless of their economic status. "I want to solve the problem from the source," she explained to her research advisor. "Instead of just providing money for expensive treatments, what if we could make those treatments affordable in the first place?" Her work had attracted attention from pharmaceutical companies and medical research institutions, but Charlotte was careful to maintain ethical standards that her mother's generation had sometimes overlooked. Meanwhile, Marcus Sullivan had left his position at Ashworth Academy to become the Foundation's Director of Security. His military background and experience with the kidnapping case made him uniquely qualified to protect the families the Foundation served, many of whom were vulnerable to exploitation by unscrupulous individuals seeking to take advantage of their desperation. "We've had 3 attempts this year by people trying to scam desperate families," Marcus reported to the board. "Fake medical clinics, bogus experimental treatments, and fraudulent fundraising schemes. It's a reminder that predators often target people who have nowhere else to turn." The Foundation had implemented strict verification procedures for all treatments and medical facilities they funded, ensuring that families received legitimate care rather than false hope. Agent Rebecca Torres, who had moved to a different FBI field office, occasionally checked in on the case's aftermath. She was impressed by how the Ashworth family had channeled their trauma into positive action. "Most families never recover from something like this," she told her colleagues. "They usually either fall apart or become consumed with revenge." But Victoria and Charlotte found a way to transform their pain into purpose. The transformation hadn't been easy. Victoria had undergone years of therapy to address her guilt over Sarah Whitmore's death and her role in James's breakdown. Charlotte had worked with counselors to process the trauma of being kidnapped by someone she had trusted and loved. "The hardest part," Charlotte told her therapist Dr. Amanda Foster during one of their sessions, "is accepting that people I love are capable of both great kindness and terrible cruelty. Uncle Jamie taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my science projects, but he also kidnapped me to hurt my mother." Dr. Foster had helped Charlotte understand that humans are complex beings capable of both good and evil actions, often simultaneously. "Your ability to hold both truths about James, that he loved you and that he hurt you, shows remarkable emotional maturity." Victoria's therapy had focused on accepting responsibility for her actions while not becoming paralyzed by guilt. "I can't bring Sarah back," she often reminded herself. "But I can prevent other Sarahs from dying unnecessarily." As James's parole hearing approached, both Victoria and Charlotte grappled with their feelings about his potential release. Neither opposed his early release. He had served his time and shown genuine remorse, but his return to freedom would force them to confront their unresolved feelings about forgiveness and redemption. "I think I want to see him," Victoria told Charlotte one evening as they reviewed Foundation applications together. "Not to forgive him or ask for forgiveness, but to acknowledge what we've both lost and what we've both learned." Charlotte looked up from the file she was reading. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I'm not sure I'll ever be ready," Victoria admitted. "But I think it's necessary. We can't move forward while pretending the past doesn't exist." The parole hearing was held on a gray October morning in a small conference room at the correctional facility. James appeared before the parole board looking older but more peaceful than he had during the trial. His hair had gone completely gray, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had spent years reflecting on his actions. "Mr. Whitmore," the parole board chairman began, "you've served 4 years of your 8-year sentence with exemplary behavior. Tell us about your plans if you're granted parole." James spoke quietly but clearly. I want to spend whatever time I have left helping other people who are dealing with grief and loss. I've been working with the prison chaplain to develop a program for inmates who have lost children, and I'd like to continue that work on the outside.
Do you take full responsibility for your actions that led to your incarceration?
Yes, completely. My grief over losing my daughter doesn't excuse what I did to Charlotte Ashworth and her family. I kidnapped an innocent child and caused tremendous pain to people who didn't deserve it.
Have you maintained contact with your victims?
James nodded. Charlotte has visited me regularly, which has been both a blessing and a reminder of the harm I caused. She's grown into an extraordinary young woman who somehow found the grace to forgive me even when I couldn't forgive myself. The parole board deliberated for 20 minutes before returning with their decision. James would be released on parole with conditions including mandatory counseling, community service, and a no-contact order that could be modified only with the Ashworth family's consent. Outside the hearing room, James encountered Victoria for the first time since the trial. They stood facing each other in the hallway, two people whose lives had been irrevocably changed by a chain of decisions and circumstances neither had fully anticipated. "Victoria," James said quietly.
"James."
Victoria's voice was steady but emotional.
"How are you?"
"I'm sorry," James said, and the simplicity of the words carried the weight of years of reflection. "I'm sorry for what I did to Charlotte, for the fear I caused your family, for letting my pain turn into cruelty."
Victoria nodded.
"And I'm sorry for abandoning you when you needed help the most. I'm sorry for choosing financial security over friendship and for letting a child die when I could have saved her." They stood in silence for a moment, two people acknowledging shared responsibility for a tragedy that had damaged multiple lives. "The foundation," James said.
"I've heard about the work you're doing. Sarah would have liked that."
"I hope so," Victoria replied. "It won't bring her back, but maybe it will prevent other families from facing the choice you had to face." James was released the following week to a halfway house in a different state, beginning a new chapter of his life focused on helping others navigate grief and loss. He would never fully escape the consequences of his actions, but he had found a path toward redemption through service to others facing similar pain. Charlotte graduated from MIT 2 years later with a degree in biomedical engineering and a patent application for a low-cost gene therapy delivery system that could reduce treatment costs by over 70%. Her innovation attracted interest from major pharmaceutical companies, but she chose to license it through a non-profit organization to ensure affordable access for all patients. "I learned from Mom's mistakes," Charlotte explained to a reporter covering her invention.
"Sometimes the most profitable path isn't the most ethical one. I'd rather change the world than get rich from it."
Victoria continued leading the Sarah Whitmore Foundation, which had expanded internationally and saved over 2,000 lives by its 5th anniversary. The foundation's work had also inspired similar organizations around the world, creating a network of support for families facing medical crises. On the 10th anniversary of Sarah Whitmore's death, Victoria and Charlotte visited her grave for the first time. They left flowers and a letter from the foundation describing all the lives that had been saved in Sarah's memory.
"Do you think she would have forgiven us?" Victoria asked as they stood beside the small headstone.
Charlotte considered the question carefully. "I think she would have wanted her death to mean something. The foundation ensures it does." As they walked away from the cemetery, both women carried with them the understanding that redemption was not a destination but an ongoing journey. The choices they made every day, in their work with the foundation, in their relationships with others, in their commitment to preventing similar tragedies, were their ongoing response to the pain they had experienced and caused. The Shadow's Gambit had ended years ago, but its lessons continued to shape their lives and the lives of everyone they touched through their work. They had learned that friendship, trust, and human compassion were fragile things that required constant nurturing, and that the price of forgetting this lesson was often paid by the innocent. The story had no perfect ending, no complete resolution of all the pain and loss. But it had something more valuable, the possibility of growth, healing, and the chance to prevent others from walking the same dark path that had consumed James Whitmore and challenged the Ashworth family's understanding of justice, mercy, and the complex nature of human relationships. In the end, they had all learned that the most important battles are often fought not against external enemies, but against the darker impulses within ourselves: greed, revenge, and the temptation to value success over compassion. Victory in these battles wasn't measured in profits or punishment, but in the lives saved, the relationships healed, and the small daily choices to choose love over fear, understanding over judgment, and hope over despair.